Hey, friends, I have an amazing show for you today. If you don't have the full amount of time to listen to it, I'm telling you, go back, finish this episode because interviewing Amanda Kate was one of the most fun and informative, just beautiful interviews that I've gotten to have since beginning this show. And I just know that you're going to take so much away from this. Amanda Kate is a transformational kinesiology coach. And if you don't know what that is, you're going to learn. She has an incredible story coming through trauma, growing, learning more about herself through kinesiology, and just has so many incredible things to share. You will not only be enlightened and encouraged, but you will also get to experience myself having like a major aha moment with her. And I hope it is the same for you. Thank you so much, Amanda, for being on the show. I cannot wait for my listeners to learn from you. We have Amanda Kate here. You are a transformational and kinesiology coach, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
transformational kinesiologist and coach.
I love it. I love it. And I've been reading through your bio. I've been checking out your website. I'm buying your book.
Awesome.
So excited to have you on the show. And I think my first thing, especially because you did list so many interesting things, topics that I'm like, I'm going to have her on like 17 times. Um, I would love to have just like a background. How did you get here? What really inspired you to go in this direction? And let us know, what's your story?
Yeah, I think I thought I lived this incredible life, and in so many ways that I did. I was raised by very loving parents. They're still very loving. They're still together after over 50 years, which is a phenomenal example of what is possible in a relationship. And they're so generous and caring. And also, we had a very strong church background. So there was a lot of that guilt, shame, blame, that isn't necessarily my parents, it's that conditioning from that religious side of things. I knew I had a very narrow band of behavior to work within. And so I did. I stayed within that. I kept everybody happy. That was like my main thing. And I ticked all the boxes: white, middle class, Church of England raised, good girl, good grades, didn't get in trouble,
Oh, that's
always
so boring.
exceptional. I know. Tell me about it. Tell me about it. It really was. But I was too afraid to step outside of that because I always felt that I wasn't lovable enough, and that if I did anything wrong and I got in trouble, that then I wasn't loved. And it was really interesting, actually. Amanda means lovable. And I heard this thing once, that the thing that your name means is that thing that you're trying to almost prove your entire life. And it's hilarious. Like, I don't know that it works for everybody, but
Yeah.
somebody told me that once. And I was like, oh my God, that so rings true, because that's been, I guess, the undercurrent of everything that I'd been busting my ass to try and be for the first sort of 36, 37 years of my life. And it's been a really interesting journey of trying to keep everybody happy and be that eternal people pleaser. But in people pleasing, what you are doing, you are automatically putting everybody else on this pedestal above you, which means that you are making yourself inferior to everybody else. Your needs are inferior, everything is inferior. And you are already setting yourself up for failure, because you can never make anybody else happy for a start.
Right.
But you base your self-worth and your self-confidence and everything about you on your ability to please people, which is already not going to happen. So there was this fundamental issue from very early on that really did direct my life, where I thought everybody else was more important. And I acted that way. And as a result, I tried to stay in the shadows. And I don't think anyone actually really got a chance to know who I was, because I didn't even know. because everything about me was based on what I thought everybody else wanted me to be to make them happy. So it was, I guess the more I've unpacked it, I'm like, God, that's so fucked up. Like it's
But
really
common, don't
screwed.
you think?
But
Like,
oh, so
common.
common. Absolutely. And especially for women and people who are other than whatever the ideal is, there is that bit of feeling not good enough and therefore wanting to prove that you are good enough, that you are lovable enough, that you are worthy enough. And even for the ideal beauty standards, I was way too tall because I was 180 centimeters or 179 centimeters, which is
I don't
what,
I have no idea what that
5'11.
what that
It's around 5'11.
That's
So I was considered
beautiful.
too tall. But when I was growing up, I stood out like a sore thumb and I didn't want to stand out. And so that made me self conscious as well. And I had a loud, ready laugh. And that was teased for years at school because I would just piss myself laughing. And people would be like, oh, she laughs like a horse, or whatever those nasty things that people say are. And nowadays, I look back and I'm going, I internalized all of that stuff. So I made myself quieter. I made myself laugh less. I was squishing myself into this little box. And it's no wonder then that I ended up in the relationship that I did and the marriage that I did, where it was a toxic relationship from the get-go. We had blazing rows because I would just want to feel seen and heard. And he would say to me from the very beginning, I am perfect. I don't do anything wrong. You're the problem. Now, if that's not a big red flag and you get your ass out of there, then I don't know what is, but I just couldn't see it because I fundamentally believed that I wasn't right. So to me, that kind of fit my underlying belief, even though I had this external facade of being confident enough and being, I guess, capable enough. And so it was just really interesting. And so I guess all of that life experience got me to this point where I had chronic fatigue. I was getting the start of a number of autoimmune pictures. Even though the doctors were saying I was the healthiest sick person they'd seen, my thyroid was not quite in the sick category. We just needed to monitor it. And I almost had I had a few early markers of rheumatoid arthritis, but then I went to I don't know, whatever the specialist is that deals with that. Can't think of the name of it now. And they said, we've just got to monitor it. So they're all going, we can't find anything. And I was suffering 13 days a month with my menstrual cycle. So 6 days at ovulation and 7 days at bleed, which is really not normal, by the way. If anyone is suffering like that, you need to go see somebody. But I went to my gynecologist, or a gynecologist, because I didn't really have one. And they wanted to put me on antidepressants because they're like, you've tried everything. And I'm going,
We're just gonna make you feel numb so you don't care so much about it. I'm a huge proponent for antidepressants when needed, but it is baffling to me and almost like never a surprise anymore when I hear about these Band-Aid techniques of just, yeah, we can figure it out. So here you go.
Yeah, absolutely. I had incredible intuition my entire life. But because I didn't trust myself, I didn't trust my intuition, even though in hindsight, every single message I ever got was spot on. And I recognized it even at the time when it was being proven right. That was the first one that was those really big lights and sirens, go wrong way back up.
Yeah.
And I went, okay, there's got to be something else. And that's when I found naturopathy, and I started seeing a naturopath, and she took me off gluten for a start, and that certainly made a big difference. And I was getting on some supplements, and it was starting to look a little bit better. But then I was still getting sicker, and I do a workout at 9:30 in the morning.
Still in your marriage at this point?
Yes,
yeah,
very much. Yeah, it was getting towards the end. I got really quite unwell in 2013. I was needing 3-hour naps in the afternoon just to make it through. And I wasn't sleeping well at night because I was in that tired and wired phase of the adrenals where you're exhausted but you can't sleep. Because it's physiologically, I now know that if a bear's outside your cave, you're not supposed to sleep deeply. And I just didn't know who the bear was or what the bear was. And so I wasn't sleeping properly. I was in this constantly wired state. I couldn't do anything right. Every day, the goalposts of what I was supposed to be doing would change. And so I was on eggshells all the time, on tenterhooks. I was constantly, my nervous system was primed for
Yeah.
attack.
Just
And it's no wonder,
living
really. Yeah,
100% in fight or flight. And so there's no like ability to even access that part of your brain
no,
that helps you do
no.
like things with thought. There's no creativity. I can totally relate. Yeah.
Yeah, I lost all of that creativity. And I'm usually a very creative person. And so it is fascinating. And then I I ended up finding kinesiology at the beginning of 2015 because I'd felt like an absolute broken shell of a human being and went to see my doctor and got a mental health care plan because of course I was broken and I needed to fix myself to save the marriage because I knew that I was the problem. And I rang this psychologist that I knew that worked holistically, did mindfulness courses and things like that, and booked into her mindfulness course, booked in for her. And the receptionist said to me, you know, you sound like you're under a bit of stress. It's still a month before the psychologist can see you. Have you thought about any interim stuff? And I'm like, I don't even know what there is. I didn't know about natural therapies because that wasn't the way that we did things. And you don't go outside the way that you do things with the kind of society that I was in. And she said to me, she was actually the first person who said to me, "Who's got your back?"
The receptionist. I love this
The
person.
receptionist. So, oh, she was such an earth angel. And it was, I burst into tears because I realized then that I was holding up the whole house of cards and I was crumbling. And so therefore it was falling apart. And I just went, fine, book me in with the kinesiologist. I have no idea what it is. And I went completely blind,
I mean, you
completely
could give me a
blind.
podiatrist right now if they're going to
I
help
know.
me, right? I don't care.
I don't care. Just seriously help me. I'm willing to try anything because I knew I couldn't keep feeling that crappy. It didn't feel that I was living a life even without even any describers. I didn't even feel like I was living a life. I felt broken and empty. And I just thought there's got to be something more. And I went for that first session of kinesiology and it just changed my life. Kinesiology over here is energetic kinesiology. So we don't just look at the physical movement, it's about the way energy is moving through the body. It is one of the somatic therapies, which means that we're looking at what's stored in the subconscious, stored in our cellular body that is creating disharmony and standing in the way of our body accessing its innate healing capacity. And so I went in for that first session. She said, I still remember, this kinesiologist was my main kinesiologist for 5 years, 4 years, 5 years, 5 years, and ended up teaching me through the end part of my diploma and through my advanced diploma. And so we became quite close through all of that. And we used to laugh towards the end of the advanced diploma. I'm going, do you remember when I first walked into your office? And we would laugh because I said to them, I need to fix myself enough to save my marriage. I'm broken. I swear they just saw dollar signs. And we joked about that. No, they're not like that. They're a beautiful human being. But they said to me in that first session, you have no idea how emotionally abused you are, do you? And I had to do the explain. I don't know what you're talking about. And over the time, it became clear. So 4 months after that first session, I realized who my biggest abuser was because I recognized that emotional abuse in other relationships, but not in that particular one. And 4 months after that, I separated. But 6 months after that first session, I was sitting in the classroom learning how to be a kinesiologist because it had already shifted my life, even though I hadn't left my marriage and I was just starting to realize the full picture of what was going on. I knew that I needed to do that to help other people heal from their traumas and find themselves again and reconnect to that beautiful sense of spirit that we all have.
Yeah.
And that we need to find the right environment to flourish in. And often we talk ourselves out of finding that environment because
We're not supposed to. You're not supposed to
We're
go
not
looking anywhere
supposed
else.
to.
You're supposed to deal with
Yeah,
it.
exactly. It's suck it up, princess. You know what? You're wanting to live in a castle and bloody blah. You're almost shamed for wanting more
Yeah,
and for not
absolutely.
being happy. And let's face it, on paper, I had a rich, successful husband, two beautiful children who still delight me to this day. We had a gorgeous house, we had regular international travel. And on paper, it was all great, but it wasn't what my soul needed.
Yeah,
And when you said at the very beginning that my experience is so broad, it's because I've lived multiple types of abuse in there. And that's just, I guess, the main, most traumatic one, although there was plenty more in there. It's not just my lived experience, it was then the fact that as I went into this energy healing, I realized that the more I knew, the less I knew, and the more I wanted to know.
yeah,
And I think I'm still in that. The more I know, the less I realize I know, and the more I want to know. And so I've banned myself from new courses for this year, but I'm constantly learning, doing, putting into practice, creating, the knowledge that I'm gaining, I'm putting into lived wisdom, lived experience. I'm practicing the tools. I'm seeing how they work for me. I'm seeing how they work for clients. And it's that constant growth and change and an evolution into whatever it is that I'm evolving into. So there is that desire just to know more about it.
it's funny because this has come up in almost every recent podcast that I've had or recorded, where I think a lot of people, they want like an end piece. They want there to
Yeah.
be like that, okay, and now I'm self-actualized and I know everything. And when
Yeah.
in reality, like whether it be business, mindfulness, being self-aware, it really is
Yeah.
just, it's a journey that when you really get into it, yes, you're always going to want to know more. There is always
Yeah.
more. You're always going to be humbled to your core. And that's what's beautiful about it, right? Like, and
Yeah.
but it's accepting that. And I think it's one of the things that unfortunately many people don't realize about it, and that it's beautiful, really.
Yeah. And I think they think that enlightenment is like an end goal.
Right.
But enlightenment is lightening, dropping some of the heaviness, dropping more of the heaviness, dropping more of the heaviness. It is becoming lighter, letting more light in, letting more of your light out, accepting your shadows so that they're not clouding your light, they are adding to it. And it's a process, and it's a constant process. And I think that people want that nice little bow to wrap things up in. It's really interesting. I've just finished this 7-year cycle because it was 7 years in January that I left my marriage. And they often say it takes you half as long to get better as it took you to get up to get that bad. And I was in that space for about 14 years. So it was really interesting. But walking into this year, it's a really strange feeling because I feel, and I use this term very lightly, I feel healed. I feel like I've done all of the work to be able to accept that past trauma. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't slip into bad habits and
Right.
that old muscle memory of reactivity. But whilst there'll be more awarenesses, even when I'm in those states of reactivity, it's almost like I'm seeing it, I'm noticing it, even though I'm in there. And I'm able to get out of there much faster.
Yeah.
And I think even with the negative voice, I often still get that, are you actually lovable enough? But I'm aware of the voice because it's been with me for so long. It's just like that constant companion. And I can control the volume on it now. I can turn it down. Yes, darling, I hear you. I know you're trying to keep me safe. We're doing this anyway. And it's a strange place to be. I know there's still a lot of work to do because I'm constantly evolving and changing and shifting and moving, and I'm never going to be standing still. And there's always going to be more for me to learn and more for me to uncover about the world of metaphysics and the esoteric world and all of that. But there is this place that I've settled into where it's almost like I fully accept who and what I am now. And to me, that's what healing is. It's that acceptance of who and what we are rather than fighting against our shadows, fighting against our light. And that's actually a beautiful place to be. And because I'm not there, but I'm on the way, it's all of that hell I've been through is absolutely worth it.
Yeah, I can relate in many ways. And so just to go back a little bit, just because I know that there are so many people who are experiencing something where it's very easy to all of a sudden realize that you've been in an abusive relationship or marriage for a very long time. And just like
Yeah.
you said, it can be confusing for a while, and then you just
Yeah.
start to accept it. There's the cycle. And how old were your kids when you decided to separate?
I think they're about 8 and 10.
And kids are so different in these situations, right? They're not like
Yeah.
talking about what they're going through, but they're going through that same fight or flight, and
Yeah.
and it'll come out in ways that you wouldn't even think is connected to that. And through all of your learnings, how have you been able to support your children who have probably had some, not just from the divorce, I'm not even speaking to that, but they saw you hurting, right? And they
Yeah.
experienced this. And so I just love to know, with now your knowledge, and as you were learning this and as you were recognizing it in yourself, even prior to divorcing, how did that change your parenting?
Oh, absolutely. In every way, it changed because I was no longer constantly on edge. So I wasn't micromanaging them in the same way. My idea was if I can control everything in this house, then he's going to have nothing to blow up at me about. He's going to have nothing to criticize. So the longer we were together, the more tightly I would hold everything. And I would work my ass off trying to make sure that the house was clean and the kids were well behaved and that this was happening and this was happening. And I was just getting more and more uptight. And I couldn't relax ever. We often laugh at who I was before versus who I am now. And even going back a number of years, they'd mention things and I'd say, what do you prefer? Living in that kind of toxic, arguing environment or having at least one happy home? Because I can't promise anybody else's home is going to be happy, but I can create for you a happy home. And the three of us, when we travel, we get on so well together. We do it beautifully. And I love watching them grow and evolve. But my job now is to be mum, not do the mothering. I've gone from the verb to the noun. And that's been a big transition over especially the last 3 years, is moving from that mothering status to mum and just being there and letting them know that I'm there for anything they need to talk to me about, and also knowing that they're at a teenage phase where they think they know everything and they want to do everything on their own, and giving them the space to do that, even when they're making really shitty decisions,
Right.
to stand back and let that happen and be there to hold them when the consequences that we can see because we're adults play out.
Yeah.
And that in itself has been a huge journey of self-discovery because it was my identity for so long. I was a stay-at-home mum because part of that toxicity, every time I got a job or looked for a job, it became too inconvenient for the family unit. And so I would be subtly forced out of it in that way that then didn't have that same independence that I would have had I kept my career going. And it's just really interesting watching that kind of dynamic as well. They went from having a mum who was there all the time to a mum who was working to a mum who was then trying to build a business and building a business and studying and basically working our ass off. So they have seen me working so hard at what I do, and also knowing that I love it, which again is a beautiful thing for them to see. They've seen the struggles, they've seen the times where I've nearly had to close my business because I don't know if I'm going to make rent at the end of the month. And then they've seen the joy when there's been enough clients then just magically call and mean that I make ends meet for the month. And all of that sort of stuff has been a really fascinating journey with them and for them as much as for me.
Yeah.
And our relationships have deepened, even though my daughter stays mostly with my ex-husband now, because when my partner and I bought, we bought in an inconvenient area. And I get it, when you're a teenager, you want to stay close to your friends, and we're a little bit further out. But even through that, we've still maintained a relatively close relationship.
Yeah.
And that for me is beautiful. And I'm praying that we've built something that's strong enough to hold us through that. But my kids went through that whole thing. If you imagine that every person in the family is a leg of a table, when one leaves, the remaining legs try to balance that other leg. So in my house, both of the kids picked up aspects of their father, and I picked up aspects of their father because he wasn't there anymore in the home. And the same would have been happening in the other home.
Right.
Because archetypally, it feels really unbalanced. We're so used to having that stability, even when it's completely unstable. And so I know my daughter tried to pick up the role of protector for me. So she slept in my bed for at least the first 18 months that we were separated. And then it was a really hard transition for her when I found this beautiful, loving, supportive partner, because she didn't want him to come in and become my protector and become my partner, because she almost saw that as her role. As much as I kept saying to her, that's not your job. I'm the parent here. That was the archetypal role that she then ended up stepping into. So it was really fascinating, again, starting to learn about that side of things and understanding how we'd all taken on parts of that role. And then when you look at their development later down the track, as I've said to them, I just hope you earn enough to be able to pay for all the therapy I've had. And I'm happy to come to any sessions because I know I've created trauma in your life.
I'll be there.
And I'm more than happy to help you sort it out.
I told my oldest son recently that every time he torments the youngest, that he's going to have to put $5 in his future therapy jar.
That's a great idea.
I'm like,
Yeah,
I realize
probably
that
owe
I'm
them
going
a
to
few
have to like
thousand.
triple that, but no, but I understand what you mean. And I think that a lot of times I talk to a lot of parents who, because marriage and life is hard, and it is really common for a child to take that role as protector. And my oldest son has for, I think, for his whole life. And I couldn't understand that. It honestly made me feel really uncomfortable because I knew that it wasn't what he shouldn't have to worry. And as I became more and more healthy, he got really confused about his own identity. And I saw that happening, and I was like, God, how much is this little boy missed out on? And now he's like upset because he doesn't have a job to do that should have never been his job in the first place.
Yeah. And it's loving and supporting them through it, knowing, and this is what I say to all parents, you are always doing the best you can at any given moment, because otherwise you do differently. Yeah. So even in hindsight, when we look back at all of this stuff and the trauma that we've put our kids through, of course we go, oh shit, I could do that differently, because we're looking with our however many years experience that we've now got and the education that we've got and the wisdom that we've lived. But at the time, if I'd stayed in that toxic environment, they would be even worse off than they are now, because I was suffering, I was sick, and I was getting sicker. And there comes a point when you're in that kind of toxicity that you're not going to recover. And I wanted to get out before that. And the other thing that I started looking at was, is this the kind of love I would be happy for my children to receive? Would I be happy if they were in this relationship? Would I be happy for my son to be loved in this way, or for my son to love somebody in this way? And would I be happy for my daughter to be the same? And in either position of either my ex-husband or I. Because again, my ex-husband thought that there was something mentally wrong with me. And he still does to this day. He thinks that I have a severe mental illness because he is fundamentally perfect. So he's done nothing wrong. So, of course, there was nothing in his fault in our marriage breakup. It was all me. And therefore, there was something wrong with me. And fundamentally, and I understand that because that's his truth. And I can't deny his truth. I don't believe it from my perspective of my truth. But I can see how he understands it's from his perspective of his truth. And so he's living to that truth, and I'm living to my truth. And there's no right and wrong in that. It's just we're looking at it through different life lenses, through different life experiences, through different ways of being raised and different societal influences. And our children are a product of that, and they have to find their way through that as well. But I needed to look, and I ask my clients often this question: are you living the type of life you would want your children to live? Not just in love, with work, with friendships, with relationships, with whatever it is. Because I know back then I could not have said yes to that.
Yeah.
Not at all. Yet now, even though my life is not perfect, but oh my God, I wouldn't swap it for the world. I have an incredibly amazing, supportive, loving partner. We've bought a beautiful home together. We've got our gorgeous dog. We have space to have all of our children in the same house. We live 10 minutes from my favorite beach. We can walk to one in about 300 meters, but I like to go to my favorite one that I used to walk through lockdown because my little community's there. It's a little bit different. And the dog can be off lead, which is nicer.
Are you in Australia now?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I knew
So,
you did live in England for a while, right?
yeah, I did 11 years in the UK and now I've been 11 years in Melbourne. So, yeah, I still consider myself a gypsy because I was born in Perth, grew up in Adelaide, lived in the UK 11 years now. I'm in Melbourne and I'm still, I don't know,
I'd like
I'm
to
home
consider
with my
myself a
partner.
gypsy, but I've never left California. So to live anyways. No, I love
Yeah.
that.
We'll find my partner and I mean, he's from New Zealand, so we often go, okay, where are we actually going to end up? Because we've got no idea.
Yeah.
But who knows? Who knows? That
Yeah.
one's future
You'll end
decision.
up where you're supposed to be, no doubt.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh my
Yeah. And I
gosh.
really trust that.
This is so beautiful because I know that it's not like we haven't necessarily talked about what it is that you do, but I think that sharing what you have is some of the most important pieces that people can really hear and take. I just like I said, I know so many go through similar situations. I don't just think, I know that there are many in abusive situations that they don't know how to qualify as abusive.
Because it's your normal. And this is the thing that I kept getting checked. And it's interesting. I had so many people go, that's not normal, don't you? And I'd be like, explain it to me. Yeah. It was this, what do you mean? Even to the point that somebody said, I actually really enjoy spending time with my husband. And I went, huh? She went, you're supposed to. And I'm like, can you just explain a little bit more about that?
Like,
And when she did, I was like, oh, okay. And it was her that pointed out how emotionally abusive my marriage was. So I'd seen it in these other relationships, but it wasn't until I was having coffee with this woman and she was brave enough to go, okay, do you see this in your marriage? The things that you've told me he says to you is not normal. It's not okay. But without those brave people, I wouldn't have known that my normal wasn't normal
those
because it was what I
people,
had lived for so long.
yeah, those people are life saving because I know there have been points in my life where I felt much the same as you, and I needed people to remind me who I was because you get
Yeah.
gaslit, right?
Yeah. Oh, completely. I
And
still, even now, sometimes I hear stories And I go, I'm not crazy. That happened. And I know that sounds really bizarre, but even now there are times that I'll go, surely that can't have happened. Like, surely I don't remember that. Right. And then I'll get validation and I'll go, oh my God, it did.
Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't imagining it. And then you go, okay, I'm not crazy. Phew. Because there were so many times that I'd say one thing and he'd go, no. And I'd be going, but you just said that. No, I didn't. And I'd be going, oh my God, did I just imagine that? Am I just. And it was just the most strange thing to live. And even when I was in class on the table, being balanced in front of everybody, things would come up and I'd see people in the class like, and they go, that's not normal. And I'd be going, explain it to me. Because we do. And I think so many people end up in this because I excused all of his behavior and I put up this facade that our life was great, our life was perfect. And so even when I left him, I had very little support from everybody else because everybody else agreed with me that I was crazy to leave such a great marriage.
Yeah.
I put the facade up. And I think this is what a lot of us do. We double down on our mistakes. We double down on our thing because we don't want to look like we've made a wrong decision or a wrong mistake or whatever it is. And so you can see where it comes through. And you can see where people get stuck in this. And it can be really challenging to extricate yourself from it because I remember my psychologist saying, divorce is not an easy path to walk. And I just said to her, what's the alternative? I can't stay. So I have to do it. And I'm glad she said it because it was
Preparation. Yeah.
great preparation. But again, I think you're right. So many people get into these situations and they explain them away and they justify them away and they double down on it because of their past shame and trauma and all of that. But when you start to realize that power shift, so I was my biggest abuser for so many years. No matter what he said, I was nastier. I was worse to myself. You deserved that, you stupid idiot, blah, 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 blah. Like the stuff I said to myself, I would not say to anybody else I loved, let alone any other human being, to be honest. I was horrible to myself. But I started getting these little questions and I'd question it, question it, and question it. And then all of a sudden I'd go, you speak to me like I'm shit on the bottom of your shoe, don't you? And he'd be like, no, I don't. But as I started to question, one, our marriage got more toxic because I was fighting back and not accepting the same thing I did. But also, I went from being my biggest abuser to abusing myself less in my head, which meant I wasn't my biggest abuser anymore. And as soon as that power dynamic changed, there was no other option but to get out. Because I recognized that I had started to heal and change, and my thought patterns were changing, and my belief about myself started to change. And that was the main thing. And I think if you can start to recognize, I said it to a client, it was one of those divine things that was given to me to say, not something that I wasn't that catalyst, but I turned around to them and I said, every time you are nasty to yourself, you are telling God he fucked up when he put you here. And do you think that you have the right to do that? Because everybody here is put here to be part of this beautiful tapestry on earth. And when you're constantly picking at yourself, you're making little holes. And you are choosing to basically tell God, you made a mistake with me. And do you really think God, the universe, creative wisdom, innate wisdom, whatever you want to call it, source, do you think that power that created everything that exists made a mistake with you?
And I just, yeah. And that's just like the beginning of it, right? Because then
Yeah.
your purpose, like what fills your soul. And that's a
Yeah.
gift. That's a God-given gift. And so many people then, and I actually had this conversation recently with a girl, and I asked her, what do you want to do? Like outside of being an amazing mother and a great wife, and like what would fill your soul? And she said, I don't think anybody's ever asked me that before.
No.
I'm like, that's like the question we need to be asking all the time, asking ourselves, asking each other. You were given a
Yeah.
purpose and you will
Yeah.
excel at that purpose and it will do
Mm,
beautiful things. But we get into that like Groundhog's Day, like you said on your
yeah.
website, like of just like, okay, and I guess this is what it is. And then the abuse starts and you're like, okay, I guess this is what we do.
Yep. And I thought my relationship was normal because I was told relationships are hard work. So I thought I was just getting an A plus and being freaking amazing at a shitty relationship. But now that I'm in a decent relationship, I'm like, oh no, relationships are hard because you're working towards the same goal and you're compromising, and even when you don't accept the other person's opinion as truth, you can understand that it's theirs and you can accept and love them for who they are despite having different ideals or opinions or whatever it is. And I think that kind of thing is where the challenge comes in, is the loving people who have different ideas to you and still wanting to be with them and still respecting them and admiring them even through that. And yeah, and we should be asking. So I do exactly the same thing in clinic. What do you want? And then they go on and list this whole list of things that they don't want as
Mhm.
wants. I don't want to be sick anymore, and I don't want to feel sore anymore, and I don't want to feel. And I'm going, you realize you just listed all of that as what you don't want,
It's
not what
hard.
you
It's
actually
hard
do
for
want.
people. Like we're not allowed
Yeah.
to want for
No,
anything,
no,
especially nothing for ourselves.
hell no. And we're shamed for our wants and our needs. We're often shamed for wanting and needing what we want and need by external people or forces or whatever. Because if you look at the way society is built, it's built on making us less than so that we need some kind of commodity to make us better human beings. We need that next lash lift cream, and we need that next booty lift cream, and we need that next car, and we need that next bit of clothing, and we need that next whatever it is, because we're always being made to feel less than.
Yeah.
When we start to realize we're all that we ever need to be, you just don't need to be anything more. And you can sit in those wants and needs and actually be okay with it.
Yeah. I love that.
Mm.
I am dying to know a general idea of what transformational kinesiology looks like. When you work with people, do you only work in person? Do you work online? What kind of resources do you have? But mostly, I'm curious because I've been doing brain spotting recently,
Mm.
and there's been a lot of like somatic, like psychosomatic, like figuring out the feeling in the body and recognizing it, calling it something. I know a lot of friends who have done EMDR, which I don't think
Mm-hmm.
is quite the same. It's not quite as like physical. I'm
Mm.
very curious to hear what transformational kinesiology looks like.
Mm. So the reason I call myself a transformational kinesiologist and coach is that you may come to me wanting to look at your relationships, but that might not be what we need to shift to improve your relationships. We might end up working on a tangent and working over here on something completely different. So I can guarantee you'll walk out differently. We just don't know how. And I trust that divine guidance is there to make sure that we're shifting things in the right order for your greatest good. And so without that promise of exactly what you're going to get. And the way that kinesiology works is we're looking for the root cause. We want to know the issues that you have now. When did they start? Where did they start? How old were you? What emotions were stuck there? What stories did you create around that? Then we vibrationally shift that memory. And that then obviously filters through. We do clean up on the way back for whatever didn't shift. And you keep working on different aspects of your life like that. So we will work on different aspects of the same issue, but usually that issue tends to be neutralized. And what you start to do is you start to recognize when you're going into those old behaviors and you're like, oh, okay, do I really want to go down that route? And you can choose a different way, or sometimes you get part way in and you're like, oh, backtrack, that was my old way, let's try this new way. The one I love is calling it a mindful tantrum, where you see yourself going down that same path and you're like, fuck it, I'm going anyway. um,
I'm making the decision to do this.
I can see where I'm going and I'm bloody gonna do it. And who gives a shit? And down
I
you
love it.
go.
I'm going to write that down. I'm going to have a mindful
Other times, yeah, other times you'll see it minutes, hours, days, weeks, whatever it is after you've done the thing. But in all of those, you're changing your neural pathways because you're recognizing those behavior patterns. You're more consciously aware of where they started, how they started, what put them there, what anchored them there. And the other thing you think about with disease is we're told we have this disease because we have these symptoms, we have these symptoms because we've got this disease, and it's this closed loop. We want to look at what stress switches were flipped that created those symptoms in the first place, that then give that disease name to it. And that's why I truly believe if we work long enough at things and find all of those individual switches and change them, that we can undo so much of the physical programming of the body, because we can go back and shift that trauma memory out of the body. And so we very much look at what emotions are anchored with the stories and with everything else and the time that it was done.
Yeah.
So I had a client yesterday and she was, oh my God, I cannot believe that this is where we went to. It was an incident at 11 and I'm going, can you see how that influenced today? And they're like, oh my God, even though it's a completely different scenario, it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Completely different, but exactly the same. And I would have, and they were just mind blown because it was their first main session with me in terms of clearing. And so it can work in so many different ways because I've done a lot of the really sciencey stuff. So we look at biochemical pathways of the body and the way the systems are talking to each other and the different stresses on different organs and all of those sorts of things. But also we go very much into that spiritual realm. And I love that there is that breadth of knowledge and the depth that comes with it as well. It's not like we just dive on the surface. We go really deep into how old were you when this pattern was first ingrained in your psyche. And then we use the vibrational tools to shift all of that out. So, whether it be essential oils or acupressure points or sound therapy or any of those things, whatever it is that your body is wanting, we use then to vibrationally change the signature that's locking that into place. And so it brings you into a place of choice rather than a place of no choice.
Yeah.
You have a choice about where you are. That's why I love the mindful tantrum, because you're choosing to go down that route. You may know how it's going to end up, but there's going to be a lesson for you at the end of it. Likewise, if you start down that route and you go, oh, hang on, backpedal, I don't want to do that today. You are in full control and full choice of how you are behaving in those situations. And then you learn all the other things around it. It's about practicing then between sessions. It might be home reinforcement on practicing with your boundaries. And sometimes that doesn't mean writing a list of what's okay and what's not okay for you, but energetically feeling into, okay, where have my boundaries been violated? Where might I need to strengthen things? Where might I need to ease up on my really tough boundaries? How might I need to enforce my boundaries for other people so that what are appropriate boundaries for me? It's thinking around it, it's journaling on it, it's just seeing in daily life, okay, oh, that didn't feel very nice for me. Is that a boundary violation, or is that something that isn't quite so hard?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So
I
it's
mean,
bringing all
and the
those things into the
goal
conscious mind.
is then because we get triggered all the time by these things, right? So the hope then is that at least we're aware of that being triggered, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully no longer being triggered by those things. I think that this is so
The
fascinating to me.
the activations And this is where I was saying earlier that I feel like I'm in this place where I've healed so much of that. I can spend time now with people who used to activate the crap out of me. And I'm like, oh, okay, I see that. Sometimes I get this little vision of me like pulling out a deck chair with a thing of popcorn going, yeah, we've seen the script before. It's like watching a rerun of Friends, it's slightly less funny. And I just chuck the popcorn in and I'm watching it play out because oh yeah, I've seen this script.
Right.
We're going down that route, aren't we? Do I engage and just feed it, or do I just sit back and it's in that I look at all the money that I've spent and all of the study that I've done and all of the healing sessions that I've had, and I'm like, every cent has been worth it.
Very
Because
true.
if I can be in the room with these people who used to activate the crap out of me and I'm not activated, it means I can spend more time with them and in a much more loving and connected way, even when I don't agree with their behaviors, even when I don't agree with what they're saying, even when the things that they are doing do not sit well with me, I can still be in that space with them. And okay, yeah, that's fine. You do you.
Yeah.
And I can still be here without it affecting me.
And that's life changing.
Oh, completely, completely. And there's also people that I refuse to be in the room with because even with all of that work, I am not ever going to be safe in their company. And so, again, it's also knowing that level of knowledge because they will never respect my wants and wishes and needs and my humanity. And so, again, that's the beauty of what it's given me, as well as that power of knowing myself so deeply that I can do this. And that's what I want to pass on to my clients. I'm 10 years into the, probably more than, I think I started really picking up on that waking up around about 32. I started to question. I started to read more of those self-help type books, the personal development type books. And I'd start going, oh, how does that relate to my life? And started doing some delving. I'm 44 now, about to turn 45. And so it's been a good 12, 13-year journey. The bulk of the healing has obviously come in the last 8 or 9 years. It's not a linear, easy one step after the other journey. There have been multiple dark nights of the soul. There have been dark nights of the soul where I have been screaming for God to take me home, literally. Just, I can't do this life anymore. Just, seriously, God, bring me back home. I don't want to be here. And yet, the more work I've done, the shorter those dark nights become. I'm not stuck in the tunnel without any light for as long as I used to be. And it's interesting looking at that. And that's what I want to gift people, is that ability to understand themselves so deeply and accept every single part of themselves. It's not just all this love and light bullshit that you see on socials. It's shadows and shit. And you have to love all of it.
Yeah.
I have to love the shittiest bits of myself. The interesting thing, when I was, and I still do a lot of shadow work, but in my shadow work, the shit's the easy bit to own because I was told for so long how shitty a human being I was. So I'm like, oh yeah, that's me. I can own that. Yeah, I get it. Got the t-shirt for that one. The light, the light is often the hardest thing for us to see.
I
And
believe
when and in shadow work, we're not just working with the shadows that we can own, we also need to work with the light that we need to rediscover within ourselves.
I
Because
think
everything we see in other people that we love exists in us, otherwise we couldn't see it.
yeah, that's beautiful.
And challenging as fuck.
Yeah. I mean, it really is, because what I was going to say is that when I am talking to a friend who's going through something rough, or anybody really, because I work with individuals often, and
Yeah.
when I give them like when I point out the beauty in them, it's like nobody's ever said anything like that to them before.
Yeah.
They feel just like in disbelief. it feels good, but they're in disbelief because they can't own
Yeah.
that. But then for you to
Yeah.
say that it's like a reflection is really like a whole other thing I've got to like put some thought into, because that means recognizing the good in me. And that's hard.
Hell yeah. That's damn hard. Because most people
Yes,
are happy to point out our flaws. I know,
that's like
sorry. Welcome to your next few months of healing. It's
I know. I'm like,
sorry.
okay, do I want to say nice things to people
I
anymore? I don't know.
That was the one that floored me. That was
Yeah,
the one of the biggest ones that floored me was going, oh, like all of the things that I admire in other people, I can only admire and I can only see because they exist in me. Likewise, all the shit that I hate about everyone else
yeah,
also exists in me.
yeah,
And
but
that's
you're
the only
right. Like
reason I
that's
can see
like
it.
that part is easy. I'm like, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't like them because they're just as annoying as I am. I
Yeah.
can accept that.
Yeah.
But
You know,
yeah,
and we all can see narcissism because we all have narcissism in us. So this whole thing, there's a very different pathology between that narcissistic personality disorder type thing and then that spectrum of narcissism that we
right.
all have within us. Being in business, you have to accept that narcissistic part. You have to go out and promote yourself. You have to go out and market yourself, or you don't get clients. And what we want to do is just put as much of our light and beautiful energy behind it as we can,
Yeah.
instead of that the skeevier type of marketing and narcissism. We want it to be love and light narcissism, not
Like when the purpose behind it is to help people. But yeah,
yeah,
you're right. You have to
yeah,
advertise. You have to market yourself because nobody
yeah,
else is going to market you.
exactly.
But it's what people have such a hard time doing.
Yeah,
Marketing. And I deal with that all the time with team members and people I'm training, and they just don't want to. I'm
yeah,
like, nobody's just going to show up on your doorstep and ask for
yeah.
what you have. And so that, yeah, that is so true and so poignant. And especially in
Mm.
a time where I think that narcissism is getting flung about. And there is such a difference between
Yeah.
the pathology
Oh, yes,
and ugh.
definitely.
Okay, so how can people get in touch with you, learn from you, follow you? Do you
Mhm.
have a book? I did see that, correct?
I do, yes. It's Divine, Messy Human, a spiritual guide to prioritizing internal truth over external influence.
That is my favorite book already.
I put the word divine first because that is what we are first and foremost, is divine beings. And we're all messy. We're all messy as hell. We are all stuck in the messy middle of something. And the more we can embrace our messiness, the more we can love our humanity and be more compassionate and empathic for everybody else as well.
Love it.
But yeah, so no, I'm very proud of it. I absolutely love it. And I've got my next one in note form in a bottom drawer at the moment and on my phone. So at some point I'll sit down and start looking at that, but we'll just wait and see. But my website is www.amandakate.com.au and you can find all my social links there.
Perfect. Perfect. You guys
Yeah.
go follow and find Amanda Kate. I know that everybody wants more after this. I know I could sit and talk to you for another hour, but you've got a book.
I know, same.
Thank you so much for being on the show with
Oh,
us. I think that everything that you have shared is absolutely like the first step of going level after next. And it's been a joy and an honor to have you here today. Thank you so much.
and thank you for bringing your work into the world. You are so appreciated as well.
Thank you.